Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Welcome to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Esther Littlefield, and today I have my co-host, Holly Kane.
Hey.
And hello. And we have our friend and guest, Christa Hutchins. Hey,
Yay.
ladies.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good. Super excited to have both of you on the podcast today. So we are kicking off the month of December, and we are talking about the idea of goals and planning and dreaming. And so this seems to be the time of year when we all are kind of looking forward to the next year. We're getting a little sick of the current year, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we often start dreaming about the future or setting our goals or the New Year's resolutions or all those kinds of things. So when Holly and I were talking about this and wanting to do an episode about this topic, I said, why don't we bring in Christa Hutchins? Because Christa is so good at helping women take their big ideas, take their dreams and break them down and actually make it so that they can follow through on them. And so we thought, Christa, that we would bring you into the conversation. So thank you for coming and agreeing to chat with us today.
You know, I'm always happy to talk about goals and dreams and plans.
Yes.
Yeah. So we actually had you, Christa, on the podcast all the way back in the beginning, episode 41, talking about the behind the scenes leadership, volunteering, and how women can move forward together. So if you've listened to that one, if you haven't listened to that one, make sure you go back and take a listen to hear what Christa says about her leadership journey. So I know that we have lots of great things to talk about. Are you ready to jump into our conversation today?
I'm ready.
Okay. Okay. Let's start off with the first sort of question that we want to talk about, which is, how do you feel about goals and planning?
Well, obviously I love it. But I love it in different ways. You know, I think goals and planning, especially with people who are very much a visionary or a creative, it can be very stressful. And so the way I feel about goals and planning is to help people who are afraid of goals and planning to get a little more relaxed about it, right? Goals and planning don't have to be as uptight as we often think they do. It's actually better if our goals and plans have some flexibility built into them. It's not about just checking the box and doing everything that you think you had to do. It's about having a roadmap to follow and then following where God leads along that road. And so I love goals and plannings, but I'm not of the very high maintenance goal and planning style.
Okay, so Holly, I want to know how you feel about it, because I think that some of what she was saying was resonating with you.
Yes. Oh my word. When you said not the high maintenance style, I was like, yes, because I have a love-hate relationship with goals and planning, because I don't know if I'm a free spirit. I don't know what it is, but I am not great at following through on these things. And so they feel a little bit restrictive for me sometimes, and they feel really hard to accomplish. I am a dreamer. So, Esther and I have talked about this, like January 1st, I'm like, I'm going to be a different person this year. I'm going to do all the things. This is the year of Holly. We are ready. Yes. And then, by my birthday, which is January 12th, I'm like, nah, whatever.
That's pretty fast. Just
I
12
know.
days. That's
I know,
very
right?
fast.
So I don't know. So goals and planning feel restrictive to me when I'm talking about my things that I want to do. Now, on the flip side, I love operations and business. And so that's all planning. And I love that. And so I have this sort of back and forth. I don't know, this sort of two sides of my brain that are fighting against each other whenever I think about goals and planning, because if someone comes to me with an idea, immediately my brain is like, delineating out exactly what we need to do. And I can see it all. I can see all the details, and I can say, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so I'm ready to do the planning, but I need to be able to, I don't know, adjust on the fly, maybe. I don't know. What do you think, Esther? I know you're very different than me. So
yeah. You guys know I love goals and planning too. I always love just the idea of having, I guess I'm just very motivated by winning stuff. And I feel like if I hit a goal, I win. A little bit competitive. So I think that's part of it. I think I've always just been a motivated, check the box person, right? I like to check the box. I like to do the things. But I will say that I think even the past couple years of life has sort of been a big challenge for all of us who are a little bit more on the first side of the spectrum that you were talking about, Christa, of being pretty strict on our goals or setting these really restrictive things that we're trying to do. And then the world blew it up in our face. And then we were well, how are we supposed to do that? So I think I'm in this place where I have to be more flexible with my goals, like you said, Christa, and make it so that there's some leeway there. But I do still find value in shooting for something a little bit further than maybe what is comfortable, if that makes sense. So
yeah, no, that's kind of the whole point, I think, is if all we wanted to do was achieve what was comfortable, we don't need goals and plans, because that's just what's going to naturally happen.
Right.
If we want to achieve something that's a little bit of a stretch, even just a tiny bit of a stretch, we need a little bit more strategic way to look at it and have a plan for how we're going to get there, because otherwise we won't do it. We'll just get whatever happens.
Right, yeah. Right. It's that whole, what is it? It's one of the laws of physics or something where it's you don't naturally get better. Everything naturally gets worse, right? Everything naturally falls apart rather than improves. So we have to be intentional if we want to improve. So, all right. So the next question I want to chat about is, do you think that it's important to set goals at a specific time of year? The end of this year, or the beginning of the new year? Christa, what are your thoughts on timing of setting goals?
I think it's really important to set goals in times of transition. And so that could be different for each person. For a lot of people, the beginning of a new year feels like a transition. It feels like when you're closing one planner and opening a new one. Maybe for other people, it's at the beginning of school. So in September, when you're starting school, that's a time for you to do goal planning. I think it's really important to do it at times of transition, because otherwise you will just be floundering. You won't be able to close out the chapter that you've been in and then walk into the new chapter or new season of the year, of your life, of your quarter, whatever that looks like for you. So yeah, it's a really popular time to do it at the end of a year or the beginning of another year. But that's also a super busy time where holidays and celebrations, and sometimes it's hard to find that time to get away and do that. So I think sometimes, for me personally, this is a really busy time of the year because I help a lot of other people with their goal setting and planning. I don't do my own until the end of January, because that's a better time for me to transition into the new year after I've helped other people close out the old year.
That's so good. I love that point of it being a time of transition. Mm-hmm. And I know for me, I love doing it at the end of the year, beginning of the new year. It does feel like this kind of clean slate of, okay, whatever happened in 2021 or didn't happen, I'm just moving on. I'm letting go of the things I didn't do that I said I was going to do, or all that stuff. And it's kind of this chance to recalibrate, I guess. But I also have found that it's helpful for me to make sure that I also set time throughout the year. Not just that first of the year, right? And doing those big goals for the year, but also doing it periodically throughout the year, kind of checking in evaluating, making changes, and making sure that I'm not completely off track from my original plans. So
I think I agree with that. Kind of doing quarterly reviews, or, just whatever milestone reviews you want to do in between, because that's like we were talking before, we don't know what's going to happen. If we set goals right now for next year, we don't have any idea what's going to happen. God may have some crazy world pandemic or something that might throw off those goals.
Not another one.
Oh, no. No more pandemics.
But that's like in 2020, we had no idea what was going to happen. So we need those intermediate opportunities to revisit our goals and ask God, okay, I kind of heard what you said back in January. Where are we headed now? And how does that relate to what I heard? Because what you heard in January or what you felt may still be valid. It just may look a little bit different. So asking God, how does this look now? And how do I walk in this dream and this goal in this next season?
Yeah.
I think for me, we talked about this during our first year. I read the book, The 12-Week Year. Mm-hmm. And so that goes right along with what you were talking about, Esther, as far as quarterly. And I think for me, that actually feels so much better to make a 3-month goal than to make a year-long goal, because it feels so much more attainable. The year-long goals feel sometimes way too big, especially since I like to dream big and I like to have big ideas. It feels more difficult to get there. And sometimes I don't chunk it out small enough to where it feels really doable. So for me, the 12-week year feels good. And I don't know about you, but I mean, every November, I'm like, how did this year go by so fast? But like the fact that we're almost in 2022 just shows me even more like how fast the days actually go, how fast the months actually go. And then, if you're not sitting down quarterly, then these things kind of pass you by, as we're sort of talking about intentionality, that sort of thing. So I know for me, as far as like this time of year versus January, I can never do it in November and December because of so much going on. And as we kind of all talked about, it's a busy season, but I am thinking about it. And I think for me, sometimes, even though we talked about in a podcast that's coming up, whether or not, we're a leaper or whether we need a lot more time to make decisions, I am a leaper. But when it comes to my goals, I like a lot of time to process. And so I actually am thinking about that now. I've been thinking about it since pretty much October. And so that last quarter of the year, I'm really kind of processing and thinking and praying about what the next goal setting time is going to look like. And that's probably why I am such a leaper, because I am already processing a lot of that before I even get to the decision point. So,
I love that idea of thinking about it for a long time before you actually sit down and putting pen on paper, because I do some of my best thinking while I'm driving in the car, where, I know Esther does a lot of thinking walking her dog, and you do a lot of your best thinking when you're engaged in other things. I don't know if that's kind of a personality trait or whatever.
Yeah.
But I love that you think about it for a long time so that it has time to kind of crystallize before you start putting it on paper. That's a really great tip.
Well, that kind of leads right into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is what do we need to do before we set our goals? So, I mean, it sounds like one of the things is to give ourselves time to sort of process, but are there other things we should be doing before we set our goals, Christa?
I think we need to spend some time dreaming, because there's a big difference between dreams and goals. Dreams may or may not be for right now. They may be way in the future, but goals are going to be the steps that are going to help us get to that dream. So in order to set reasonable and realistic and meaningful goals that are in line with what God wants to do with us, we need to dream and look out and say, what is this really going to look like? One of my favorite exercises to do, I learned from Liz Bohannon in her book, The Beginner's Pluck. It's called just having a wow God moment, just sitting back and saying, looking out at the ocean or looking out at the stars or whatever inspires, encourages you, and saying, what would it look like if there were no restrictions, no boundaries, no constraints, and all I could do was sit back and say, wow, God, look what you did. What would that look like? And then I tear up every time I even think about that or even explain that, because it's just such a powerful moment to sit back and say, wow, God, look what you're trying to do with me, with my gifts, my goals, my family, my career, whatever, my ministry, whatever it is. Look what you're trying to do. Okay, now what kind of things do I need to do to get in line with that in order to get to that wow, God moment?
I love that reminder to dream. And what you just shared made me think of what we all heard at the Clarity to Courage conference from Avery Forrest, who spoke on the first night. And she talked about at the beginning of the year of 2021, talking to God and saying, I want to stop doing things that I can do in my own strength. And I want to see you do things, God, that only you can do. Like, I want to be a part of doing things that only you can do. So that kind of aligns to what you just said, Christa. And for me, I am such a practical person and such a logical person that I don't naturally dream those big dreams. I have to be intentional, like what you just said, take that time to sit down and allow God to speak to me outside of because when I make my goals, I'm usually just going to be thinking what is realistic for Esther to accomplish in 2022. Now, I generally overshoot what is realistic, but that's different than dreaming. You know what I mean? That's different than allowing God to give me an entirely different vision for the year, perhaps, than what I would come up with for myself. So I think that's just so valuable to take that time to dream and allow God to speak to us before we set those goals.
And I don't know about you, Esther. I know you are a writer, like you write to process. I verbally process. So I sometimes need to talk about it with other people to really process how I'm feeling. And honestly, like sometimes I don't even know how I'm thinking about it until it comes out of my mouth. And so I have to verbally process that. I know you write. Do you sit down and like write a prompt or whatever and kind of process how you're feeling before you actually make the goal?
I do. Yeah, I try to. And I mean, Christa does this thing at the end of the year, a workshop, which I'm sure you'll share with us later, Christa. But I find that I need to take an intentional day or two where I'm focused on this idea of, and the thing I wanted to add to what I think we need to do before we set our goals, the dreaming is important, but I think also reflecting on the past year, which is part of what Christa walks people through in her retreat, is reflecting on the past year. And that's something that, because again, I tend to just go, set the next goal, and I forget to reflect on all the stuff that God has done, all the wins that I did have, all the things. Like last year when I sat down, I realized I had been on like something like 8 to 10 other people's podcasts. Like I had guested on that many podcasts in the year, and I didn't even realize it. Like it did until I took the time to sit down and reflect and recognize those wins. It hadn't even like clicked in my head that had happened as a win. So taking that time. So yeah, I find physically writing it down for me is huge, to actually put it on paper and to see this is what has already happened. Like, let's take time to be thankful and acknowledge what God did already in the past year, So yeah, definitely taking the time to reflect and to write it down is helpful for me.
So I would love to know, I think this goes right along with what we're talking about, but how do we even know that the goals that we're picking are the right goals? I mean, I want to know so badly what you have to say about this, Christa, because I feel like I've made the wrong goals before and it's gotten me in a bad place.
Well, I think that happens to a lot of people. I think we are been very conditioned to try to set SMART goals, things that are very specific, very measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. And everybody has heard that and been told that probably multiple times. But for me, what I find is that is too restrictive, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But I tend to try to set what I call peace goals instead of SMART goals. I'll just cover these little points really quickly. And then Esther, I'll give you a download that people can get more detail on the peace goals. But it's 5 parts. Number 1, your goal should be purposeful. So it should align with your deepest purpose. Like, what's God called you to do in this season of life? And kind of in that wow God moment, your goals need to align with that purpose. They need to be essential, right? We, as multi-passionate women, we love getting our fingers in all the pies, right? And we want goals for lots of different areas. But when we get our attention pulled in so many directions, we dilute our efforts and we can't really make progress anywhere. So you want to distill those goals down to the really things that are the most essential for you in your life. You want to make them adjustable. And I think, you've talked, Esther, in a previous podcast about the good, better, best goals. So we want our goals to be adjustable. So we've got a big, broad range to shoot at. We want them to be current. And that kind of goes along with the 12-week year, where we want to keep our eyes on those long range goals. But really, I love this question that Dave Ramsey asked. What do I need to do today that my 10-year self will be proud of me for doing? What will I do today that my 10 years from now self will be angry at me for not doing? So our goals need to be purposed on what we can do today to make an impact long term. And then lastly, our goals have to be enjoyable. We have to have fun doing them, right? There's definitely lots of drudgery, especially in the online business and ministry world. There's lots of things we have to do that we don't like to do, right? But our goal should be something that's going to bring us joy at the end of the day, that we're going to enjoy doing it, enjoy working on it, enjoy the people that it impacts, and then have some joy in that. So peace goals, I think, are the type of goals, and that's a good measure you can use to determine if those are the right goals for you.
I love that. Holly, what do you think about that?
That feels so much better. Smart goals. Yeah. Because honestly, goal setting has never been something that makes me feel peaceful. So, right. And even when I have these sort of big dreams, I'm always thinking, okay, what can I do to manufacture this? And I love that you mentioned, Esther, what Avery said, like, I want to do things that, God, you have to show up in these because I can't do them myself. And so even though I do that big dreaming and I'm like, okay, I realize that God is going to have to move for this to actually work, I'm still trying to manufacture and make it happen. So I love you talking about purposeful. And for me, that makes me just kind of step back and go, okay, these are the things that I've always dreamed or pictured myself doing, but like, what is my actual purpose? And that kind of changes that end goal. It could look very different than what I think it was going to look like. But as long as I'm following in the purpose God has given me and the giftings he's given me and the passions he's given me, then I need to kind of dream about what that end goal looks like, but also, like that be adjustable and allow him to work in the way that he wants me to work. Because if I were to say right now, I am going to achieve this big thing that I've dreamt of, if God's not in that and I put myself in that position 10, 15 years from now, I don't care what it actually is. I don't want to be in that if that's not what he has for me. So yeah, I like what you said. All that to say, I like what you said because it feels so much better to me than those restrictive goals that we set. So
it's very hard for the super type 1, super Enneagram 1 people to think like that. I'm sure it probably makes Esther uncomfortable. Yeah. It's not specific enough for her.
We need some numbers, people.
Does it make you uncomfortable when we talk like that, Esther?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But I've loosened up a lot in my wisdom of the years.
That adjustable is where the numbers come in, right?
Yeah, right.
That's where there still needs to be some numbers, but I think we wanted to talk a bit about the mistakes people make or why they don't stick with their goals. Yeah. That's one of the biggest reasons we make that target so tight that when we realize we can't get there, then we quit. So if you say, my goal is to lose 30 pounds this year and you get to November and you've only lost 5, you're like, well, there's no way I'm going to lose 30 pounds this year. So I'm just going to quit. Well, what if you lost 5 more pounds? That's better than losing 0 more pounds, right? So that adjustable is where I think that's the biggest place I see people make mistakes with setting their goals or not sticking to their goals, is because they've set it too tight. When they realize it's not achievable, they just quit instead of adjusting.
Yeah.
The other mistake that I have made a lot in my life is what you referred to earlier, Christa, which is that idea of basically setting too many goals, like trying to accomplish too many things or be accomplishing a goal like for every area of my life, right? Like if you've ever done the power sheets, which we've talked about the power sheets, which I still love the power sheets. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful planner to use for goal setting. But what I was falling into when I was using them is I was trying to have a goal for all those different areas of life that she talks about in the planner. And I'm like, well, now I'm shooting for like 8 different things. And that's a lot.
Yeah.
Like I want a better marriage and I want a better house. And I mean, a better, like my house to be cleaner. And I want, my business to be successful and my faith life to be better. And like, you're trying to, like you said, Christa, it dilutes your efforts because we all have a limited amount of capacity in our lives. Now, we all maybe have slightly different capacity. Yeah. There are some people that I'm like, how do you do the things that you do? Like they just are. It's someone with like high capacity, right? Yeah. And then there's some of us that have a little lower capacity. But the fact is we all do have a finite amount of capacity. We can't achieve 18,000 goals in 1 year, So that's one of the mistakes I've made.
And there's nothing wrong with saying, even though I've got 3 or 4 areas that I've specifically intentionally setting goals and making plans to achieve, that doesn't mean you say, okay, well, I'm just going to let my marriage slide and my house cleaning slide, and I'm not going to worry about those things at all, right? You still do the things are right to do in those areas.
Yeah.
But maybe for some people, your marriage may be in a good place, and it's not a place where you have to spend a lot of extra super effort in, where someone who's struggling does need to. So it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not like I have to have a goal for it or I'm not going to think about it at all.
Yeah.
Right.
I think what you just said with the all or nothing, I just want to say one more thing about that, because that tends to be my issue too. Like you were saying, Christa, and with the numbers. So that's why the adjustable thing is really helpful when we think about, but just in general in my life, I tend to be all or nothing. Like my desk right now, like you guys can't see it because I strategically place my computer in a way that people can't see my mess. But like I am an Enneagram 1. If I don't have like 3 hours to clean my office is just a complete disaster. Like I can't mentally be like, I could take 5 minutes and just clean up a few things because I'm not going to get it to the place where I want it to be that moment. So that may not be totally a goal setting thing, but it definitely plays into my goal setting.
Yeah, because it's what causes you to quit when you can't make a little bit of progress. I could make a little bit of progress. I have someone that I follow on Instagram. She's been doing like this thing for the end of the year that she's not calling it like finishing up the year. She's calling it like getting a jump start on 2022. Like think about, what do you want to accomplish in 2022? What are some easy things you can do now to start setting up for that and getting ready for that? So like make some progress, make any progress that you can. That progress matters, even if you don't get all the way to the finish line.
Yeah.
I was just thinking as we were talking about this, like, and this kind of relates to what you were talking about, Esther. Like, I think for me, when it comes to that mistake, it's like I have rose-colored glasses about the pieces and parts of it that are going to be hard. And I don't take a realistic look at the pieces and parts that I don't like to do. And then I don't sort of coach myself through doing the hard parts of it. Like, when you come to a goal, it's so easy sometimes to just dive in and do the parts that you like and then let it sit. And the parts that you don't like just sit there and they become this monumental thing in your head that just kind of, I really need to do that. I really need to do that. And then, we put these things on the shelf that we've sort of worked on. But for me, I need to be realistic that I don't like this part or piece. I don't either want to do it or I don't like doing it. And then coach myself into saying like, okay, how can I, like you said, Christa, how can I make progress on it rather than do it in its fullest extent or, perfectly, right? How can I make progress and what little piece can I do today? Like how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So for me, if I'm not realistic about the parts I don't like, that's a great place for me to quit. So I think everything that we're talking about is identifying and preempting our sort of quitting spots. Like, where is it going to be hard for me? What's the part where I'm going to give up? And how can I walk myself through those pieces? Or how can I reach out to someone and say, hey, can you help me with this? Because we don't have to do every piece of it. We can hire, we can trade for work, we can hire someone out to clean our house. We can, if we feel like the goal of having a better marriage is too hard or too difficult, we can, invest in books, invest in courses, invest in, therapy if that's needed, invest in retreat time. Like, what resources do I have other than just my time and my brain to actually accomplish these things? So
I really love that idea of identifying what's going to be hard for you, because that's different for everybody.
Yeah.
And so that kind of one size fits all, well, this is where it's going to be hard for you, doesn't really fit. But I really, really love that concept. I'm going to be pondering that.
Well, and I think what you just said too, Holly, is super helpful to remember, is that we don't have to accomplish our goals alone. Right. And I know that's something that Christa is really passionate about. And she and I right now are working on a project around community, and this idea of having a community around you that can help you accomplish your goals. Like, do you want to speak to that, Christa? It's not something we really planned ahead of time, but.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, like Holly said, the quitting point for everybody is different. So the more people you have surrounding you who can help you get past those quitting points, the better off you're going to be. And it's just more fun accomplishing your goals in community. You have people to cheer you on. When you get discouraged, there's somebody else who's saying, it's okay, I can pick up at this spot when you fall, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. It's okay. I'm going to pick up here, or vice versa. You don't carry that burden of it alone, and you share the hard parts of it and you share the joy of it. And that makes it way more fun and much more productive too, because again, you're not going to be stuck without someone telling you, okay, I get it. I hear you. It was bad. That was horrible. All right, brush it off. Let's keep going, right? You need that brush it off person who's going to help you get past that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So Christa, one of the things that you help women with is you help them stick with their goals by making realistic plans, because as we identified already, some of us just set these crazy goals and then we don't actually have a plan on getting there. And so you help women with breaking those goals down into smaller steps. So I'd love if you could just share a little bit about why that's important, and maybe some tips on how to do that if somebody is new to that idea.
I think we get too wrapped up in just the big idea. Like you said, especially very visionary people, they just want it to happen. And so they say, this month I'm going to launch my newsletter. Well, launching a newsletter is not something you can check off of a to-do list, because there's too many parts to doing that. And so I think when we look at our goals, we think about it like layers of an onion, or levels, where we start out at the big, this year, these are some main areas that God wants me to focus on. And I want to make progress in these areas in this year. And then we start looking at, that means I need to do certain things. Then we start looking down at this quarter. Okay, what do I need to do this quarter in order to get to that thing that God wants me to accomplish, or this area to make progress this year? Then we say, okay, now that I know what I want to do this quarter, what am I going to do on Monday when the calendar turns to January 1? What is that week going to look like? So starting at that big picture and letting it flow down to our to-do list for the week is the important part of making plans. Too often we just start with the to-do list and say, oh, I know I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. And we don't really pay that much attention about what order we need to do them in, what resources we might need to do them, where we might need some help to do them. And so if we start from the top down instead of working from our to-do list up, then we make better plans that are in line with that vision and with that goal that God's given us for the year. So that's one of the things that we do. I do believe, I really feel like there's also a level of detail. Like your yearly plan is very high level and just kind of a big picture. And you also need to be aware of some things that may happen during the year that you kind of have to plan around. Like my son is getting married next year in November. So my October and November next year will look very different. This year, those have been big times of business growth for me. But next year, I know I have to put my business growth things outside of that window because I have that big thing. So that helps me make my overall plan. Then when I come down to the quarterly plan, that's a little more detailed. It doesn't have as much detail as my week, but it has the idea of what I want to do. I break it up into 2-week blocks called the planning 6-pack. So every 2 weeks, I've got a block of things that need to get done within those 2 weeks. And then I break it down into the 1-week plan. So it's more detailed as you come down those levels instead of just starting at the very detail of your to-do list.
Yeah. And I think that that's super helpful, especially for someone who is, like you said, more creative, more visionary. They're not necessarily going to naturally do that. And they might just, like you said, sit down at their computer on Monday morning and think, okay, this week I'm launching a podcast, right? And so they just start just randomly doing things, but they may not be getting done strategically or in the right order, or they might just see a new idea and decide to do that new idea instead. So,
yeah, I talked to somebody not too long ago who said she wanted some help making a plan for launching her book. And I was like, well, what's the book about? And, when are you going to have it ready? And she's like, oh, no, I haven't started writing it yet. I'm like, okay, well, how about we make a plan for writing the book first? And then we'll worry about planning your launch. But that launch was just like on her brain that it was so important that she knew it was going to be important to the success of her book. And so it's like, okay, well, it is important, but let's focus on what's important for today. For today, what's important is writing the book. However, when you know that launch is something you're going to have to do at the end of writing that book, it makes you aware as you go through the writing the book process of things you'll need, like, oh yeah, this would be a great quote for a graphic, and you kind of start, or this story reminded me of this person. I want to get them to help me promote the book. So you can start capturing those ideas for a future goal while you're working on the today goal without getting super detailed about that future goal. Focus on what you've got in front of you, but keep an eye on what's coming up ahead.
So I have a question that we didn't plan but I think it's super relevant to what we're talking about. And I'm wondering how you kind of feel about this, Christa. So how important is it in goal planning and setting these things down to have an ideal plan for your week of when you're going to work on things, when you're not going to work on things? Or is that something that's not super needed? Like for me to say like every Monday at this time, I'm going to sit down and do this doesn't necessarily follow my sort of creative juices or whatever. I can't just turn it on and turn it off. So I'm wondering what you think about that. How important is it to create that?
Again, that's one of those things that falls into the personal preference. I think it's very important for some people. For other people, it's really important to identify what those blocks of time are. For me, I like to look at the beginning of the week. It's not an ideal week every week. It's not the same every week. So at the beginning of the week, I will look at what are my blocks of time that I have available to work this week. And I will assign my to-do list tasks to a block. And so I know when I get home from work on Monday night, these are the 4 things that I need to get done tonight. I don't have to sit down Monday night and say, okay, here's my big to-do list. What am I going to do tonight? Because I'm going to waste half of that time if I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah. So I think you need to craft a week, but I don't think the week has to be the same every week. Yeah. I think it definitely can look different every week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing, one of the girls in my mastermind had this great idea. She calls it flexible time blocks. So at the beginning of the week, she'll take her task and she'll say, I need 3 hours to do this, this, and this. And I need 2 hours to do this and this. And so she has them grouped into little blocks. And so then when she is presented with a 3-hour block of time during the week, she can pull it and put it in that block because she's caregiving and some other things. She doesn't know when that block of time is going to happen, but she knows she's going to have that block of time. And so she kind of makes them flexible time blocks to fit in however her week develops. And I really love that concept. I think it works really well for some people.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that for me, I have to continually just be flexible with how I manage my schedule. So this is like my follow-up question for you, Christa, and Holly too. You can share out what you think. But, we all know that 2020, I'm kind of sick of talking about it, but what we learned from that is that life doesn't always go the way we plan, right? The goals that we set may or may not happen. Like most of my goals for 2020 just went off the rails. So how do we deal with it when we have these goals, even if they're those peace goals that you talked us through and like they're not super restrictive, but what do we do when like someone in our family gets sick or, a crisis happens at work or just something happens at church that throws our whole life off balance? Do you have any thoughts around handling when things go off the rails?
I think one thing that really helped me through 2020 was the idea that when I sat down and made those goals for the year, God knew there was going to be a pandemic. And so when he inspired me or, how it motivated me to set those goals or make those plans, he knew what was going to happen. So then I start looking, okay, God, if you knew this was going to happen, what were you thinking here? And trying to understand, what was he thinking? Was he trying to help me focus my attention in a different area? Was he trying to make me make progress in a place where I would not have thought of before? Is it the same goal, but it just looks a little different right now? Where is God asking me to give myself grace as I go through that situation? But just remembering that he's in control. He knew when he inspired you to set that goal that what was going to happen. And that's why it's so important, coming back to what Holly said earlier, is that we do invite God into that goal setting process. Because if we set goals for things that God is not in, when those things happen to derail us, then we're pretty much on our own because we were out where we didn't belong to begin with, right? But if we're inviting God into that goal setting process and we're really listening and hearing from him where our focus should be this year, whether it looks exactly like we expected or not, it looks exactly like God expected. And we just want to find and meet him in that place.
Yeah, I so agree with everything you're saying, Christa. I think for me, and this goes kind of right along with what you're saying too, is depending on how closely held those goals are in my heart and in my mind, I need to give myself the space to grieve it. Like I have learned that it's okay to take a minute and be sad or upset or kind of process my feelings with someone or with God about, I was really looking forward to this and it didn't happen. It's okay to take a pause and just really feel your feelings. I think in this sort of goal setting process and planning and sort of, when we hear about these different CEOs and stuff, they're like pivot and do all these things. And that's great. But like, pick yourself up by the bootstraps only goes so far because your mind and heart are still back there. And you need all of you to move forward with the new thing. So for me, I think thy will be done and giving our goals over to God goes hand in hand with grieving what we thought was going to happen, because the more that we hope in Christ and more that we hope in God, the less that we're hoping in these end goals and the easier it is to move forward. But we can't shy away from the fact that we are human and we do get excited about these things and we do feel gung-ho about them. And it's okay to have feelings and grieve these things. And I think it helps you move forward more wholly when you can do that. So
100%. I love that. And I think so often we heard pivot. And I heard in my heart from God was stand firm. And I knew what was going to happen when I gave you these dreams. Stand firm in them. They may look different. They may execute differently.
Yep.
Grieve what you thought was going to happen, but stand firm in what I know is going to happen.
Yeah.
I love that. And I feel like that's such a good place to kind of wrap up this conversation of just the reminder to allow God to basically to entrust our goals and the results to God, right? Like we can bring him into the goal setting, but then we need to entrust him with the results and also with all the things that might happen in between and how it might look differently. So, so good. So, Christa, we always like to wrap up saying leaders are learners, and it's been a little bit since you've been on the podcast. So I'm going to let you share a new resource that you have for us that somebody might want to either read a book to read or a podcast to listen to, or something that would be helpful for them in their leadership journey.
I am loving all of the John Acuff books. I love him. I'm about halfway through Soundtracks right now. And that has really been challenging for my mindset and to make sure, especially in these years that have been tough years, to get my mind out of the negative space and into a positive space and recognizing what God really says about me. So I love all of his books.
Yeah.
Soundtracks and Finish is a big one for me as well. So I would recommend John Acuff books.
Same. I love both of those books for sure. Mm-hmm. That's great. We'll put those links in the show notes.
So Christa, can you just tell everyone where they can connect with you, how they can kind of follow you if they want to use your resources, get to know you better, maybe even work with you, where people can find you?
They can find me at my website, doanewthing.com, and on Instagram and Facebook at Do a New Thing. And like Esther mentioned, I have 2 big events coming up. One is the free Looking Back Challenge, which will start the middle of December. And we will look back at the year and figure out what things we need to carry with us into the next year and what things we need to leave behind, and start getting a vision for the year. And then the year-end goals planning workshop, which will be the end of December. So you'll be able to find out about both of those things in all my social media and on the website.
Awesome. We'll make sure to put those links in the show notes as usual. So thanks again, Christa, for joining us today. This was really a fun conversation. And I hope that for our listeners, they're able to take a lot from this and then hopefully join your Looking Back Challenge. That sounds really fun. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you guys so much.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Women Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, come and join us in our private Facebook community. We would love to get to know you better so that we can make sure the podcast is providing what you need. Plus, you can share your questions and ideas, and you'll be surrounded by incredible Christian women leaders. To join the group, visit estherlittlefield.com/group. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.